Welcome. My name is Kat Romero. I'm with Oklahoma Faith Network. And today we have the Reverend Chebon Kernell, an ordained elder in the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, currently serving as the executive director at the Native American Comprehensive Plan of the United Methodist Church. He's an enrolled member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma and is of Muskogee Creek heritage. I had the pleasure of hearing Reverend Kernell speak at the Eco-Faith Retreat hosted by the UMC, as well as the National Faith and Climate Forum. And his words and perspective are really a perfect start for tending the garden as we get started, because mainstream society, meaning those who have a huge impact on our planet, must really start thinking differently about how we live and start to follow a different call that's really centered around the natural world on which we're so dependent. So thank you, Reverend Kernell, for taking the time to lend your voice and helping people answer that call. So I'm going to hop off and let you share. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Mado Jigejis J Chebon Kernell Choho Chipkados. I just want to say thank you and for allowing me this time to come and share a little bit about our perspectives as Indigenous peoples, and specifically concerning this Earth Mother that we walk upon and the conditions of the world around us that we see kind of coming to fruition, the things that are going on before our very eyes. As was just mentioned in the introduction, I'm an enrolled member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, but I'm of Muskogee Creek ancestry, which is probably the history behind that is probably an entire separate teaching to go into what that, to deconstruct and decolonize what that understanding is of that type of enrollment. But I'm an Indigenous person. I practice our ceremonial ways of life that we've been kind of that has been passed down to us from our ancestors, is how we say that. And so I'm very happy to be here to share just a little bit of this perspective with whoever it is that wants to hear it, whatever the audience may be, people of faith, non-people of faith, secular community, whoever it is. I kind of joke from time to time that the message that I share is really the same, whether I'm in front of governmental officials that are Indigenous, governmental officials that are non-Indigenous, spiritual communities, interfaith communities, and even ecumenical communities that affiliate with Christianity. The message has kind of always been the same. And so today, I appreciate this moment as we think about, some of these first understandings of how do we live in a sense of harmony with this Mother Earth. For those of us that are Indigenous to North America, and we can, kind of look at our ancestry and those things that, as we look back and realize that, those that have come before us have been here for over 20, 30, 40 generations past, who we see that are now have been laid back to rest in the earth that we now walk upon. Even myself, as a person of Muskogee ancestry, my homelands are now in the southeastern part of what is now called the United States, in the states of Georgia, Alabama, North Florida, the southern part of even up to the Tennessee River Valley, the southern part of Tennessee. All of us had an eclectic way of living in our communities, and even in the ancient of ancient times, even there were times that there were migratory paths that took place for our people. I start there because I want to recognize that, for millennia upon millennia of existence, there was a sense of harmony and a sense of living that took place, a sense of life that took place that minimized. I don't know I've never really phrased it, that minimized the violence that we seen taking place to the natural world. The natural world, including this Earth Mother that we walk upon, the natural world, including the full biodiversity of creation, and in that biodiversity, including human beings as natural species as a part of that. There was a day and time when we did not see the level of violence that we see in so many forms today. It wasn't in existence. And for us here in North America, this is something that even our own peoples, we've been kind of displaced and dispossessed from even our own history, partly because of removal policies of the United States government, things of that nature that have profoundly impacted the cosmology of our existence of Indigenous peoples. And so I start there today because this is something that, in my opinion, in my hope, and really it's not just me, but Indigenous peoples across the world are hoping that we can realize the wisdom, the value, and the place of Indigenous voices across Mother Earth, to help us as we strive to find what I call extractive society is searching for, and that is solutions to climate disruption, solutions to all the things that we see all across the world. In terms of some of these cataclysmic weather events, all kinds of stuff that we see, the access to clean drinking water, access to even land to live in a subsistence way of growing our own food. All of these things we're starting to see become minimized across both the global north and the global south as the demand for consumption grows year after year and decade after decade. And so I recognize that as Indigenous peoples, that we have been attempting to survive colonial efforts, imperial efforts of missionizing, all kinds of things that has had a profound impact in even our own understanding of how we are to exist and to walk on this earth. And today, we're just now coming into a moment collectively where groups, tribal communities, collectives, all across what is now the United States are trying to now salvage and put back in place the pieces of that cosmology that allowed us a little bit more of a harmonious existence on this earth. But as you might guess and you might understand it, it's really a daunting task as we think about the efforts of this country to eliminate Indigenous peoples. We think about this country and its efforts to even, just in the past few years, we saw at a widespread scale things being talked about like the government and church-run boarding schools, residential schools, or the term that I use to describe that is re-education centers, that after a period of going through conflict and things of that nature, when we entered a moment of now the establishment of reservation systems and the stories of Trail of Tears became prevalent, that there was an initiative for those of us, the remnants that were left of Indigenous peoples, now there was a policy to re-educate us to a foreign way of existence. And from those efforts, we are just now today, in these past probably 10 to 15 years, starting to put back in place and recognize how terrible those moments were. And so today we come here because there was a way of life, recognizing there was a way of life that didn't do the violence that we see taking place to each other, the violence that we see taking place to other species, and the violence for sure that we see taking place towards this Earth Mother. The one way that I try to illustrate that is to, number one, to acknowledge for how long Indigenous peoples were in existence in our territories that all of us are now walking on. It doesn't matter what state that you live in or what region of the United States that you come from, that you're on Indigenous land, no matter what direction you face or where you come from. There were and are Indigenous peoples in those locations, in those respective areas. I start with myself, coming from, like I said, the southeastern part of the U.S., that in that location alone, our ancient ones, our old ones, we have an oral history of them communicating with this country's founding persons, that kind of thing, of having those conversations, talking about where our sacred sites were, where we wanted to see areas protected when we were facing dispossession, when we were facing removal. In that location, which they said was there's a mound structure called the Okamogi Mounds, where it is believed that it was said that this is where was the birthplace of Muskogee people, that in that location alone, human inhabitation had been taking place for close to 20,000 years. I paused there because we say that number, but I don't know if we really realize how long of a period of time that is. Even in our school systems today, whether they're elementary, high school, or even into undergraduate and that kind of thing, I'm not so sure we even teach that fully. Kind of the consequences of this length of time of being in one location. To put it into perspective, I often ask people that I interact with, well, how old is this country of the United States? And if we take, 1776, July 4th, that kind of thing, we're just now getting closer to 200. The U.S. is just now getting closer to 240 years old, 238, something along that lines. I'm not a mathematician, so forgive me, but somewhere along that lines. Really, just in the grand scheme of time, really just the blink of an eye. And those of us that are a part of the United States think that it has always been here, since the birth of creation, since the beginning of time, so to speak. But that's really opposite of how long our country has been here. This country, as we know it now, has been here. And unfortunately, this is what I link it to, is that in that same amount of time, when we saw countries that were formulated through so-called imperial conquest, these kinds of things, that they made a foundation of kind of what I would call exploitation. They made a foundation of colonizing for financial gain, for financial wealth, commodifying anything and selling anything that would have been of value. For sure, these so-called explorers, or these persons who went out, were searching for gold and different types of metals of that nature, but they were also looking for things that sold, pelts, different things, trade goods, beads, and also human beings, lives of human people. All of these were commodified during this moment in time. And in that same amount of time of just 3 centuries, less than 4, we start to see this commodification process lead to all of the things that what I would call extractive, of taking from this earth, of taking from anything that could have been sold for monetary value. It was a foreign way of existence, but it was also a way that was forced upon indigenous communities, whereas those kinds of extractive ways of existence were not in existence. But I don't want to go into too much detail, because my point is that during that small window of time, we see to the point of the year 2024 now that we have done more damage to this earth than those previous millennia upon millennia upon millennia upon millennia. And today we enter conversations with communities, with governments, with indigenous peoples who are trying to teach the truth of this reality. Everywhere we enter conversations where people are trying to find what they call solutions to climate change, solutions to climate disruption. And one of the things that we hear in voices of indigenous peoples all across the world is voices of indigenous people saying, hey, look at us. We already possess the answers to what we see going on in this extractive society, this way of existence. And the ways of communities and the ways of people living across the world are the evidence that there is a possibility that we can come back to our first way of existing, that is found in indigenous communities throughout the world. And so this is one of the things that we try to affirm, but also add voices to here in the United States, and to whoever will listen to say there is time, I think, where we can reverse the course of action of what we see going on through these the small window of time and the damage that we've done to this earth. But we have to realize that time is of the essence, that we have done so much extraction from the earth in terms of minerals, in terms of taking, that the earth hasn't had, our mother has not had enough time to heal herself from this extraction. And in fact, we're in a moment now where the demand and the grab for more and more and more is exponentially increasing. And so what we're trying to do is to help creation, help people to see by going back to our original way of existing. We might encounter the answers to the problems that we're seeing surrounding us. And so one of the things is just realizing that what we see before us, having a capitalistic society, all of these things, it hasn't always been in existence, but it's so normal. We do not even know how to deviate from that moment of what I call extractive existence, extractive economy, extractive systems. And so this is what my hope is, by persons who are, for whatever reason, want to learn about, engage in these conversations, learn about what's going on, that we can do our due diligence and start making those decisions to say we have to reverse our way of existence. But it first starts with realizing that there is a problem. And unfortunately, much of the world around us doesn't really realize that. And so today, that's what I'm here for, is to help us to see that and recognize that there are still ways of living that surround us by persons who do live in a greater sense of harmony with all that the earth contains. There are those around us that are trying to do what they can to teach the truth. But sometimes the world that we live in that demands this way of existing economically, financially, politically, it forces us, it backs us up into a corner to say you can only exist in this manner. And so today, my hope is that together we can build something and, start to dream about what can we do in the future. Because this way of life hasn't been here forever, this way that we see of extraction. And it's become so normalized. I want to give you an example, is that it's been probably about 18 months ago, I was asked to go to Bali, Indonesia, where we were having some preliminary conversations with indigenous communities prior to, I think they called it the G8 summit that was being hosted by Bali, which they kind of just highlight these countries, these 8 countries kind of just highlighted, kind of what their focus would be over the next couple of years. Perhaps it was finances, politics, of course, all of these things. I think they were discussing the various conflicts that were taking place. And we came to meet to give a statement to say, here's what your priorities should be. And one of those statements was challenging the notions of capitalism and saying that as long as we go down this path, there's always going to be a demand for taking more for less. No matter how you slice it, there's always going to be that demand. And there was a healthy conversation taking place. A lot of people, everyone there was of the same like-mindedness of talking about, what are different so-called financial architectures that are there. And one of the presenters said something that caught my attention as an indigenous person. And they came up and they said, well, money has been around forever. And they went on with their presentation. And I heard that. And I looked around at our fellow participants, and I said, as soon as they had concluded and we got back to our consultations, I said, did anyone catch that? Because money like we know it has not been around forever. Money has been around for a very small portion of time that is linked. Wealth, the way that we know it today, is linked to this extractive way of existence. And it is very much counter indigenous existence. And I caught that. But this way of living that we see surrounding us and the pursuit for so-called monetary wealth or possessions, these kinds of things, is so normalized. We don't even realize when we're participating in that same extraction. And I sat there and I was actually kind of shocked, but I pointed it out and we were able to make sure we notated that so that we could come back to, if you're in academia, you can kind of say pedagogical foundations. If you're in, theological academia, you want to say epistemological foundations, whatever it might be. But coming back to the origin, beginning with indigenous peoples, because there was a day and time when we lived more simply, when we didn't have the same demands of this world that were upon us. And so all of this is what I have deemed extractive living, extractive society. And today is the day and time when we have to start analyzing and recognize where all the directions of that extraction is taking place. Because for sure, extractive industries, oil, gas, all of these things, lumber, land, even some of the minerals that are going in so-called renewable vehicles and phones and all these things do the same damage to our Mother Earth as anything else. And we have to realize that extraction takes place in all of that, all the way even into, something as simple as the 5-day work week, working, 40 hours a week. They're all connected. And so today, by just acknowledging that, I think we come to a place where we can start looking at where do we go from here while there's still time. And so for me, it's always going to be the foundation as an indigenous person, recognizing the cosmology that we carry for us. And like I shared with a group a few weeks ago, and I try to bring with me, is that one of the foundations and the core pieces of our identity that we bring with is always being mindful of our interactions with our ancestors and our interactions with those that are coming after us, and making sure that the decisions and the things that we do acknowledge those that have sacrificed for us, but also do no harm to future generations that are about to walk upon this earth mother that we are now on. And so today is the day and time when we have to realize that every time we use plastics, every time we start using these vehicles that we see surrounding us, all of these things, they're going to have an impact. Every time we see extractive industries disposing of waste, even in the natural world, which we see taking place all across the country. Many of our indigenous groups today are trying to save sacred sites that are vulnerable right now to some of these companies that are out there. Every time we see that taking place, it's going to harm someone. And this is what, for us as an indigenous peoples, it's one of our laws, so to speak, that we will not. In fact, they're going to be those that young ones that are yet to come are going to be our priority. And even some of our tribal communities from other nations, they say that we think 7 generations ahead to say that the decisions that we make will impact those generations before us, coming after us. And so that's what my hope is that we realize that we cannot go down this path. We cannot accept the normalizing of the climate disruptions that we see. How many times for those of us that call Oklahoma home, how many times have we dodged tornadoes and cyclones and those kinds of things time and time again, only to hear on the weather reports, well, this is the largest recorded storm, or this is the most rain we've had in the least amount of time and on record. All these kinds of comments we hear, we've normalized it, and we have not accepted that climate disruption has already impacted us. And I'm someone who who dwells in a place that has a high rate of these storms and tornadoes that are coming through. So I've seen it firsthand. Um, uh, very, it has come very close to our community. So today, our moment is coming where we have to come together in a way that shows respect and reverence for all that life is, all that creation is, and start dreaming about what can we do for the future. Even one of the questions is, what is the remedy to extractive society? I want to just say the opposite of extraction, which is giving, which is reciprocity, which is humbling oneself, which is being, in a sense, existence in a sense of love and respect for all of the diversity of this world. But it's more than that. And together, it's my hope that we can come to a place where there's no more of the social violence that I've seen, where fingers are pointed, where hatred takes place, and even we try to remove each other from existence. I've seen it time and time again, and in fact, I see this happening to Indigenous peoples across the world, where if companies or paramilitary hired forces don't get their way, we're seeing Indigenous leaders who are just defending their homelands, their sacred sites, their cemeteries, their burial grounds. We're seeing them being assassinated. And even in other places, we're still seeing children being taken out of their family settings and taken to re-education centers in other places around the world, still in this moment in time. So today, what my hope is that we can respect the existence of each other, and we can start building and saying, here is where we draw the line. We have to respect diversity. We have to respect even those persons who dissent with us. In this day to day, it is almost a crime, and in some place it is a crime, just to dissent with the popular thought of the moment. That the ability to just say no can almost get you thrown in prison. And this is something that has happened with Indigenous peoples for centuries. We first saw it come to a wide scale kind of understanding when we saw many of our folks at the Standing Rock Reservation say no to the extractive industry that was there, only to see many of them be arrested, many of them be harassed, simply for dissenting and saying no. That has only increased exponentially in the years since that moment. Now, like I said, it's not something new that just started then, but it was something that just caught the attention of some of the mainstream media outlets and that kind of thing. This is something that's been taking place, and now we're at a moment where it is very frightening, because just to say we don't want you to cut down this forest, it might get you in prison. Just because we say, I want this water to stay clean for my grandchildren, for your grandchildren, it might get us, there might be consequences for just making that stand. Even today, there's an initiative from the United Nations as they work to try to better some of the conversations that are taking place across the world. Some of you may have heard of free, prior, and informed consent. They're saying that that's the guideline that you have to take when you go and enter into a territory. If there's going to be a company or a government that's going to try to do some type of so-called development, that kind of thing, they say you have to go through the process of having free, prior, and informed consent before that extraction or agreement is made. But I challenge that, because consent is rarely given to these entities, and that there has to be an acceptance of the denial of consent. Because what we see happening now is that once the denial takes place, then everything is thrown at that community that has given that denial, so that now the only response they have is to say no and to stand in front of that extraction. And that's where we see people being forced in prison, forced in jail. And that is happening even here in the United States. So Those things are there. Where do we come to a point where we can now walk together, hand in hand, life energy to life energy with all of creation, and saying we can't continue to do this? There was a day and time when we could go and drink the water out of the nearby creek or river that was right there, but those days really don't even exist anymore. Even there's times when we come out of ceremonies that we are to go to a live water source, and we've only come to that moment when we get there to only realize that someone has polluted and there's extraction from the oil industry in that water source that we go to, and so we can't really use it like we had historically done. This is the reality that we're living in. And so today, our hope is that we can now realize that everything that has been formulated around us, everything that we've seen come to fruition, we can't go down this path anymore. Every tree, every source of water, every breath that we take is sacred. All of these things. I believe I was on a webinar with some of our good colleagues just a few months ago, and we talked about how only 4% of this earth is still in its natural state, that 96% has been disrupted by human existence in this moment in time. When I share that, we have to realize that everything that we do through cutting down of trees, through these types of endeavors, it has an impact. And the moment has come where, we have to start redefining what so-called progress is, redefining what sustainable development is, and not always let industry or systems define what those things are. And my hope is that we can just look to our past, the past and the presence of Indigenous peoples, because the answers are there if we allow our people, our communities to exist and to live in that same manner of having a way of respecting this earth, of understanding where our first origins come from, of understanding where our first breath of life took place in connection with creation. And that's what my hope is. Today, we see government spending billions and billions of dollars to go and find solutions to the eco crisis, the ecocide that is taking place around us. And even I was a part of some of those conversations in this past year in Dubai, where we went to the COP28 conference on parties to talk about agreements that that nations can make with each other to help eliminate this what we see going on. And I only went there because I knew the voices of Indigenous peoples would be very limited, because we try to, we're all sharing the same story and the same chorus of concerns that are saying this is what the answer is. We possess the answer. But we realize that I kind of pointed out, and I said, we spend billions of dollars to all go to this one place and different places across the world to make so-called agreements, when the answers are really in our backyard, is to recognize those lifeways and life systems and the cosmology of Indigenous peoples. My hope is that we will do that before any more violence takes place, and that we will see that this way of life is a good way of life that can provide wisdom to all communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous persons. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want, is that we want a healthy world around us where our children can laugh, our children can play and enjoy life as kids can and should, and we want to be together. I don't believe there are many that are out there saying, get off this land or anything like that. We just want a sustainable future that does no violence to our presence. We want to be able to grow our own food. We want to come back to the spirituality of that food that we put into this earth, and to be able to have the freedom to know that there's a spirit in that food that comes from our Creator. There's the same spirit in that food that's in us. We want to come back to that first way of existence and not have to be scared to exist in that manner. And so today, that's what my hope is that for all of us, for whatever our background, wherever we come from, that we can be able to do that together. thank you for these few moments, and I appreciate the time that was dedicated to our Indigenous voices as we think about our future, our connections to this earth, our connections to each other, and our shared hope and dream for a future that is not violent to the presence of creation.